So thanks very much, and thanks for the opportunity to speak today. And I'm honoured to follow both my boss and Francesco. I hope actually that I'll echo some of the sentiments that they had in their interventions. Perhaps we just go straight to the slides, if that's all right. I will confess that I'm a little out of my comfort zone with this presentation. I'm not used to talking about communication. I'm used to talking about satellites, observing systems, data flows, and so for me to prepare for this, I leant very heavily on my colleagues elsewhere in the WMO, and particularly in the services department. So I just want to acknowledge their contribution there. Also, I'm not a meteorologist, I am an observational scientist, but I will say that I have been, particularly in my time at the Bureau of Meteorology, right at the forefront of climate communication. So I'm very happy to add an element of that to my presentation as well. But today I want to talk about the role of meteorologists, how the role is changing, and I want to talk about the things in the heading here, the science, trust and communication. And towards the end, also just some maybe forward-looking things for people to think about. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So I'll start by framing the role of meteorologists and how that role's changing, and then later on focus on trust as a central concept, and as I mentioned, look at the challenges and opportunities. There's a recognition, I think, in communication that information needs to be relevant to the user, and we need to be mindful of maybe intrinsic biases or unconscious biases that we might have, which I think Francesco was referring to when we maybe take a developed world perspective to some of these things. But if we go to the next slide, please. So the profession of meteorology, or the role of meteorologists, and I would use that term pretty broadly to include operational forecasters, people working as professional meteorologists, but also maybe people working in the area of climate communication as well. Technology is moving incredibly fast. In my career in meteorology, which spans, I guess, nearly 30 years now, I can remember when I started that people were drawing charts by hand within the Bureau of Meteorology. There was maybe models were relied upon for guidance, and now we're moving to a situation where the accuracy of models is increasing all the time. We regularly can forecast out 7 to 10 days. So we have this acceleration of technology and expanding sources of information from satellites and from different types of in situ observations. We do have challenges in communication, both coming. So we had some dialogue about 1.5 degrees, but in a warming world, we do face situations that we maybe haven't faced before, extreme events where we haven't had a precedent. And I think there's increasing recognition that the diversity of users that we have in the community means that we need to tailor information and services, warnings and so on to the user communities to ensure that they're relevant. Meteorologists obviously support decision-making by connecting data with user needs and societal impacts. There's a real, I think, increase in societal expectations. People expect that information is going to be immediate, that it's going to be localized, and it's going to be relevant to their context. And so that puts a lot of pressure on meteorologists and meteorological services in general in terms of tailoring services that people are actually going to want to consume. And then finally, the role is changing because this is now becoming a contested space. Meteorologists are competing with other voices for attention. The barriers to entry in terms of providing meteorological services are reducing, and AI is a part of that. It's very easy to take a global data set and do some processing in your garage and generate an app that people might want to use, or put information on the internet or whatever. So it is becoming a much more contested space than it had been previously. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about trust. trust is at the foundation of service delivery, and particularly in an age of disinformation, we rely on trusted, reputable sources of information, and trust is the kind of foundation of that. If we go to the next slide, please. So what does trust mean in meteorology? Well, you know, trust determines if meteorological data leads to meaningful public actions. It's fine for a meteorologist to issue a warning or an advisory or a service, but if there's no trust there, then that will be taken or will just disappear into the noise of all the other information flying around. Met services walk kind of a fine line in terms of earning and losing trust. Trust is earned through providing regular services day after day, but it can easily be lost, and we see examples where maybe there's a forecast blowout, or maybe the Met Service doesn't do a great job in a severe event. I can think of a number of examples in Australia. It could also be an example of maybe a PR error or some kind of blunder on the part of the organisation, which also reflects badly on the services and maybe impacts the level of trust there. So trust is difficult to earn, and it's quite easy to lost, but it is built over time through repeated interactions and through communicating clearly. And of course, in severe weather, trust, as I mentioned, influences whether or not people hear the warnings and heed the warnings and take protective measures. Next slide, please. So trust, it's built through relationships, and this could be, as I already mentioned, like individual relationships, a person's individual relationship with maybe their Met Service or their favoured provider of meteorological information. But this could also be organisationally, and the example that I would give is, let's say, the relationship between a Met Service and a fire agency or an emergency management office, where you have strong connections at the organisational level, but also at the personal level. And you know, in some cases, the Met Service might have an embedded forecaster who's working with those emergency services workers to help them to interpret the information, and this builds strong relationship and builds mutual understanding and trust over time. Next slide, please. So I mentioned before a contested information environment. Weather and climate information, it's widely shared, but you know, social media amplifies both accurate and inaccurate information. Climate information can obviously be politicised. We'll talk a little bit about that in subsequent slide. But clearly, misinformation and competing voices can undermine public trust in scientific climate communication. Meteorologists need to be clear, need to be consistent, and need courage to maintain trust and engage in difficult conversations. And I will say that there's a need. I'm just going to have a drink of water here. There's a need to think about the support that's needed to be given to those frontline staff as well. To see examples around the world where people come under personal attack for just providing scientific, factual information. We've seen this many times. Organisations need to think about what support they can provide to those staff who are public facing. This could be people working in the comms area who are dealing with perhaps people who are sceptical about the reality of climate change. It could be a meteorologist who's doing a live cross who is suddenly ambushed about, let's say, El Nino, or ambushed about climate change or whatever. So we need to make sure that these people have adequate briefing notes and are suitably prepared so that they're not going into these situations unprepared. So finally, legitimate voices and institutional credibility are essential amongst this kind of growing information noise that we're seeing. Next slide, please. So trust in practice, particularly in warnings and climate communication. If we just go to the next slide, please. So as mentioned already, I mean, I think this is clear that trust is vital. Trust in institutions, trust in individuals is vital in early warning systems to ensure that people are heeding the warnings and that they're acting effectively during emergencies. Communication needs to be clear, consistent and repeated, aligned with observed conditions, and this just strengthens trust in warnings. Trusted channels is really important, and this goes back to what I was saying before about building up familiarity and trust over time. Regularly visited websites or mobile apps can provide an important channel for delivering trusted, timely information, improve the effectiveness of warnings. A good example might be from the Australian context, the Bureau of Meteorology, the weather radars. It really attracts people to the website and gives them a kind of familiarity with the way it's set out, and gets people used to looking at that regularly, and that can mean that it's much easier to communicate warning information to them. Next slide, please. So meteorology and climate, it's intrinsically probabilistic. We often talk in terms of likelihood. We can think about previous IPCC reports in terms of the language that was used there in terms of uncertainty. And of course, this isn't what users want. They want definite answers. They don't want anyone beating around the bush, and this causes frustration, I think, when uncertainty is not clearly explained. But as mentioned, by being clear and honestly explaining and doing our best to explain this in clear language can enhance credibility and support informed decision making. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. Next slide, please. So in terms of communicating climate change, as a trusted expert, meteorologists have a role. They're involved in obviously the day-to-day weather, but depending on the context of the organisation, meteorologists can leverage their expertise and their relationships to communicate climate change effectively and to build trust in the organisation. I already talked about the challenges faced in terms of scepticism and politicisation. This does expose people to individual attacks, personal attacks, and this requires resilience, neutrality. People need to have media training and need to be prepared for these eventualities. They need effective strategies to be able to communicate and get out of these, get through these situations. Next slide, please. So data accessibility for meteorological services, this can be a way to build trust in institutions. So open data and open source to some degree. Open data enables interested persons to engage directly with the science, to inform themselves. It also helps to build a community, to build consensus, build a community of experts who are engaging with the data who can reinforce the messaging of meteorologists. So I think this is really important. Being, also acknowledging where mistakes have been made openly and honestly, and not kind of trying to cover things up or be too defensive. Next slide, please. I'm conscious of the time. I'll try and get through this as quickly as I can. So I just wanted to talk quickly about the way the profession is changing now. There are obviously some major factors at play that are changing the profession of meteorologists. So if we go to the next slide, please. So I already mentioned before, so I apologise for the very small font on this slide. I don't know what happened there. But as more and more functions of the meteorological value chain, and I would say this predominantly in developed met services, but as more and more things become automated, we have heavy reliance on the models, we have heavy reliance on automated systems even for generating warnings. It, in some ways, frees up meteorologists time to do other things, and there's an ability, and I think that we're seeing this in a number of Met services around the world, there's a shift towards interpreting uncertainty, interpreting the information, translating the meteorological impacts into actual impacts on people and on economic activity. We'll go to the next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah, so just to talk a little bit about, we do have a bit of a kind of two speeds globally. So on the one hand, what I just mentioned in developed Met services, we have the ongoing march of automation and maybe the shift of meteorologists to cover those communications kind of roles and those interpretation kind of roles. But the reality is that many countries are still trying to catch up in terms of developing an operational meteorological capability. And I can tell you that within the last couple of years, I've visited Met services where they are still drawing charts by hand, where there is no digital data coming into the Met service at all. So we have this kind of two worlds, if you like, and people in the maybe these less developed Met services still have those kind of challenges around communicating warnings effectively and so on, but are also kind of tied up just in the kind of production tasks. So it is something as a community that we need to address in the development context. And maybe I'll talk about AI in a later slide, but maybe there's an opportunity for some countries to leapfrog the transition, maybe building the capabilities for the future rather than developing skills that might be rapidly superseded. Next slide, please. No presentation in this time would be complete without at least one reference to AI. Just mention that AI-based forecasts, it's dramatically changing the ability of smaller Met services to develop their own forecasts and also to make forecasts a little bit more locally relevant. And on the other hand, as I already mentioned, it reduces the barriers to entry for other players and allows different people to be also providing meteorological services per se. But it's demonstrating value right along the value chain, not just in generating forecasts, but also in automating warnings and interpreting outputs to generate text-based bulletins and warnings. So this will continue to have an impact, but I mean, as we're seeing right across the economy. Meteorologists are clearly still going to have a role in terms of safeguarding data standards, validating products, and communicating proper use to ensure trust. Next slide, please.
I'm going to interrupt for 1 second. Are we?
Yes.
Because we're kind of going over time a little bit here. Are we close?
I'm very close.
Okay, great.
Next slide, please. Okay. Oh, well, I think we've covered this, so let's shift on to the next slide, please. Just to say on this slide, one of the areas where the profession is changing and where meteorologists, where there's opportunities for meteorologists is not just within the Met services. We're seeing roles for meteorologists in industry and in places maybe where we hadn't thought about that before. I mean, agriculture, aviation, shipping, but also increasingly insurance, even commodities trading. So we're seeing the strategic value of meteorological and climate information being valued as commodity, and the expertise around that also being valued. Go to the next slide, please. So, look, this second last slide, I just want to mention this is just something to think about for everyone. Users are increasingly accessing information on the internet in different ways. We've already seen automated traffic on the internet is greater than human traffic. It actually overtook human traffic in 2024, and it's now 57% of all traffic on the internet, and it's just increasing exponentially. And what we're seeing is people aren't accessing information as much via traditional websites. They're typing into an AI interface to say what's the weather like today or what blah blah blah. And so this challenge for meteorologists who are used to communicating information through a website, through an app, through TV, radio. This is a different communication channel, but it's also a different way of providing information. And so that's something, it's changing very fast, and it's something that we need to think about. Look, in the interest of time, let's just go to the last slide, I think. So just in summary, the roles are shifting rapidly with advances in science, technology and societal needs. Trust is critical in terms of both communicating climate information and communicating warnings, and that there's going to be a need increasingly to work with AI, both on the production side but also on the delivery side. And with that, I will stop, and thank you very much for your time.